The infrared feed flickered across 3 separate command screens in Tampa, each one showing the same nightmare unfolding in real time. 12 dots clustered in a dried riverbed, surrounded by 47 others closing in from 3 sides. The SEAL team had been off-grid for 19 hours. Now they were pinned, outgunned, and running out of night. A colonel leaned forward, knuckles white against the desk edge. Someone whispered about extraction options. Someone else mentioned the quick reaction force being 30 minutes out. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 years. The enemy was 200 meters away and closing with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you have the numbers. The radio crackled. A voice came through, calm and unhurried, with the faintest accent that nobody in the room could place. Kodiak, Maine. This is Gypsy 7-1, holding at Angels 12, 15 miles southwest of the package. I've got playtime and a full combat load. Request clearance hot. The air controller glanced at his supervisor. The supervisor looked at the colonel. Everyone knew the calculus. The area was thick with vegetation, uneven terrain, and zero margin for error. The friendlies were danger close to everything that mattered. A-10s were designed for tank columns and open desert, not surgical strikes in triple canopy hills. The colonel's jaw tightened. Negative, Gypsy. Stand by for instructions. Silence stretched across the channel. Then quietly, almost conversationally, Kodiak, Maine, respectfully, standing by is what gets them killed. I have eyes on, I can work it. The room went still. You didn't push back on a colonel. You especially didn't do it on an open channel with half the task force listening. The air controller's hand hovered over his headset. On the screen, the enemy dots crept closer. One of the SEAL team leaders came through on a separate frequency, breathing hard, words clipped. Any station, this is Reaper 1 actual. We are taking effective fire from treeline north and east. Request immediate close air support. We cannot hold this position. The colonel stared at the screen. 12 Americans, 47 hostiles, 200 meters and shrinking. He looked up at the surveillance feed, then at the altitude readout for Gypsy 7-1, 12,000 feet. Safe. Detached. Exactly where doctrine said she should be. His finger pressed the transmit button. Gypsy 7-1, you are not cleared hot. Maintain holding pattern and await further instruction. Acknowledge. For 3 long seconds there was no response. Then the voice came back, softer now, almost gentle. Acknowledged, Kodiak, maintaining holding pattern. But on the infrared feed, the A-10's icon began to descend. The tactical frequency lit up with overlapping chatter, voices stepping on each other as the operations center tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Gypsy 7-1 was dropping altitude without clearance, without coordination, without a single word of explanation. The air controller's voice sharpened, losing its professional veneer. Gypsy 7-1, say altitude and intentions immediately. The response came through with the sound of wind roaring in the background, the unmistakable scream of speed brakes deploying. Gypsy 7-1 is Angels 3 and descending. Intent is to provide close air support to Reaper 1 actual. I have positive ID on hostile forces and clear separation from friendlies. Someone in Tampa swore. Another voice cut in, this one belonging to a brigadier general who had been listening from an adjacent room. Gypsy 7-1, this is Kodiak 6. You do not have clearance. Abort your run and climb immediately. This is a direct order. The A-10 kept descending. On the screen, her altitude read 2,000 feet now, then 1,800, then 15. She was dropping into the weeds, into the zone where shoulder-fired missiles became a coin flip and small arms fire could shred hydraulic lines. The SEALs were still pinned. The enemy was inside 150 meters now, maneuvering in bounds, using the terrain like they owned it. Reaper 1 actual came through again, his voice tight with the kind of control that only comes from years of practice. Any station, we have enemy dismounts advancing on our pose from multiple directions. We need fire now or we need to break contact, requesting immediate support. The colonel stared at the feed. He could order a full abort, ground the A-10 pilot the second she landed, end her career before the sun came up. Or he could let her work, let her try. Let 12 men live or die on the judgment of a pilot who had just ignored a direct order from a general officer. His hand moved to the radio, but before he could speak, A new voice joined the frequency. Calm, deep, with the unmistakable rasp of someone who had spent too many years screaming over road or wash. Kodiak, Maine, this is Reaper 1 Actual. If Gypsy 71 says she can work it, let her work it. We trust her. The room went silent. Trust. That word carried weight in this community, the kind of weight that didn't bend for rank or regulation. It meant something had happened before, somewhere, sometime. The colonel's eyes flicked to the senior air controller who pulled up the pilot's jacket on a separate screen. The file loaded in pieces, deployments, combat hours, commendations, and then halfway down, a single line that made everyone stop. Strike Eagle pilot, 214 combat missions, Syria and Iraq, call sign Gypsy, separated from service under administrative review, rejoined Air National Guard, requalified A-10, current status, reserve augmentee. The controller looked up. She's been doing this for 11 years. The colonel didn't respond. On the screen, Gypsy 71 leveled off at 800 feet. The A-10 came in low, so low that the infrared feed caught the heat signature of her engines washing across the treetops. She was below the ridgeline now, masked from any observation point the enemy might have held. The tactical net had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. In the dried riverbed, Reaper 1 Actual shifted his weight behind a crumbling berm, eyes scanning the tree line. His second-in-command crouched beside him, rifle up, breathing steady despite the rounds snapping overhead every few seconds. The enemy was close enough now that they could hear voices, sharp commands in a language none of them spoke but all of them understood. Advancing, coordinating, winning. The SEAL keyed his radio, voice low. Gypsy 71, Reaper 1 Actual, we are grid November Tango 472386. Hostiles are tree line to our north and east, danger close, say again danger close. We are marked with IR strobe, how copy? The reply came instantly, no hesitation. Reaper, Gypsy copies all. I have your strobe. Sit tight and keep your heads down. This is going to be close. Close. That was an understatement. The A-10 rolled in from the west, nose dropping, and for a moment the only sound in the operations center was the faint howl of turbofans spooling up. She didn't fire immediately. Instead, she flew straight over the enemy position, a single high-speed pass that lit up every thermal scope and night vision device in the valley. The enemy scattered, diving for cover, their advance stopping cold as the aircraft's shadow fell across them like the hand of God. Then she turned. The maneuver was sharp, aggressive, the kind of bank that pulled GS and made your vision narrow. She came around in less than 30 seconds, lined up on the northern tree line, and opened up with the GAU-8. The sound arrived a half-second after the impacts. 30mm depleted uranium rounds chewed through the canopy, through cover, through anything that wasn't solid earth. Trees exploded into splinters. The ground erupted in gouts of dirt and shredded vegetation. The infrared feed showed heat blooms where the rounds struck, a line of destruction that walked across the enemy position with surgical precision. She fired in bursts, 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off, adjusting after every pass. The SEALs stayed flat, helmets pressed into the dirt, feeling the pressure wave roll over them like a physical force. When the gun went silent, Reaper 1 Actual lifted his head. The northern tree line was gone, just stumps and smoke and silence. He keyed his radio. Gypsy Reaper, good hits, we still have contact to the east. Her response was immediate. Reaper Gypsy, stand by. She rolled in again, lower this time, so low that her belly seemed to brush the ridgeline. The eastern tree line lit up with muzzle flashes as the enemy opened fire, desperate, panicked, throwing everything they had at the slow-moving jet. And the A-10 absorbed it. Rounds sparked off the titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit. Hydraulic fluid misted. An aileron took a hit, and she kept flying. The second gun run was slower, more deliberate. She came in from the south this time, using the terrain to mask her approach until the last possible second. The GAU-8 roared again, a sound like the world tearing in half, and the eastern tree line disintegrated. The enemy fire slackened, then stopped. Reaper 1 Actual scanned the area with his thermal scope. Nothing moving, nothing alive. He keyed the radio, his voice rough. Gypsy, Reaper, threat neutralized. You just saved our lives. There was a pause before she responded. When she did, her voice was quieter, almost tired. "Reaper Gypsy, glad I could help. I'm going to need to set this bird down somewhere soon. I've got some systems that aren't happy." The controller in Tampa sat forward. "Gypsy 7-1, say status." Another pause, longer this time. "Kodiak Gypsy, I've got hydraulic failures in 2 systems, partial loss of flight controls, and my number 1 engine is running hot. I can make it to the nearest base, but it's going to be interesting." The colonel's face was unreadable. He glanced at the senior controller, who was already pulling up the nearest recovery airfield. "Gypsy, Kodiak, nearest suitable field is Al-Assad, bearing 085, 80 nautical miles. You are cleared direct priority handling. Emergency equipment will be standing by." Her voice came back steady. "Gypsy copies, direct Al-Assad. Thanks for the help, Kodiak." The A-10 turned east, climbing slowly, trailing a thin line of fluid that caught the morning light. On the ground, the seals began moving, extracting from the riverbed under the cover of the smoke and dust. Reaper 1 Actual paused at the edge of the position, looking up at the sky where the A-10 had disappeared. His second-in-command stopped beside him. "You know her?" Reaper 1 shook his head. "No, but I know the type. The kind that doesn't wait for permission to do the right thing." They moved out, following the rest of the team toward the extraction point. Behind them, the valley was silent except for the wind moving through the shattered trees. In Tampa, the operations center was already filling with senior officers, everyone wanting to know what had happened, who had authorized the strike, why an A-10 pilot had ignored a direct order. The colonel sat alone at his console, watching the replay of the gun runs. He watched the way she had maneuvered, the precision of her fire, the way she had put herself between the enemy and the SEALs without hesitation. After a long moment, he picked up the phone. "Get me her personnel file, all of it. I want to know who we just watched." The file arrived 20 minutes later. He read it in silence, his expression darkening with every page. By the time he finished, he understood. And he knew that the conversation waiting for him when Gypsy 7-1 landed was going to be a lot more complicated than a simple debrief. The approach into Al-Assad was rough. Gypsy held the stick with both hands, feeling the sluggish response through the controls. The hydraulics were bleeding out faster now, and the number 1 engine was throwing caution warnings every few seconds. She ran through the emergency checklist from memory, prioritizing what mattered, letting go of what didn't. The tower cleared her straight in, no pattern, no delays. She could see the emergency vehicles lining the taxiway, red lights flashing in the pale dawn. Fire trucks. Ambulances, the whole circus. She toggled the radio. "Al-Assad Tower, Gypsy 7-1 is 3 miles, gear down, full stop." The controller's voice was calm, professional. "Gypsy 7-1, Al-Assad Tower, winds calm, runway 10, cleared to land. Emergency equipment is in position." She didn't respond. Her focus had narrowed to the runway, the airspeed, the sink rate. The jet wallowed as she crossed the threshold, fighting her on every input. She pulled the throttles back, felt the wheels kiss the concrete, and deployed the drag chute. The A-10 shuddered, slowed, and finally rolled to a stop 3,000 feet down the runway. She shut down the engines and sat in the silence, breathing hard, hands still gripping the stick. Outside, the emergency crews surrounded the aircraft, checking for leaks, for fire, for anything that might still go wrong. A crew chief climbed up the ladder and knocked on the canopy. She popped it open, letting the cool air wash over her. The crew chief looked at the damage, then at her. "Ma'am, you brought this thing back on a prayer and spite." She pulled off her helmet, letting her hair fall loose. It was dark, cut short, streaked with gray. She had stopped dying years ago. Her face was lined, weathered, the face of someone who had seen too much and decided to keep looking anyway. "Spite's usually enough," she said. The crew chief grinned, then stepped back as a staff car pulled up to the aircraft. A colonel climbed out, flanked by 2 senior NCOs. His uniform was crisp, his expression unreadable. He walked up to the ladder, looked up at her. "Captain Nayar, I'm Colonel Harding, Vice Wing Commander. We need to talk." She nodded slowly, already knowing how this was going to go. "Yes, sir. I expect we do." She climbed down, her legs stiff from the flight, and followed him to the staff car. They drove in silence to the operations building, a low concrete structure that smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. Inside, a small conference room had been set aside. Harding gestured to a chair. She sat. He remained standing. "Do you understand what you did out there?" She met his eyes. "I provided close air support to a SEAL team under effective fire. I neutralized the threat and preserved American lives." His jaw tightened. "You ignored a direct order from a general officer on an open channel." She didn't flinch. "Yes, sir, I did." Harding stared at her for a long moment, then pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. He placed a thin file on the table between them, her personnel jacket. He opened it, flipped through a few pages, then looked up. A-10, 14 years in service, 214 combat missions, Silver Star, 3 distinguished flying crosses, honorable discharge followed by reinstatement, and a disciplinary file that reads like a case study in insubordination. She didn't respond. He leaned back, folding his arms. "You were a Strike Eagle pilot, one of the best according to your squadron commander. Then you walked away." "Why?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I had a disagreement with leadership about how we were prosecuting targets in Syria. Civilians were dying. I raised concerns. Those concerns were not well received." Harding nodded slowly. "You refused to drop on a target because you believed the intelligence was faulty." It wasn't a question. She nodded. "The intelligence was faulty. We found out 3 days later. The building was a school, 42 children." The room went quiet. Harding stared at the file, then closed it. "So you left?" She shook her head. "I was encouraged to leave. There's a difference." He studied her, his expression softening slightly. "And then you came back, joined the guard, requalified on the Hog. Why?" She looked down at her hands, scarred and calloused from years of gripping throttles and sticks. "Because I wasn't done. And because the A-10 doesn't drop bombs on schools. It kills people who are trying to kill us, up close, personal, no room for bad intelligence." Harding considered that. Outside, the sound of jets taking off rumbled through the walls. He tapped the file. "The SEALs are alive because of you. You know that?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." He leaned forward. "You also violated about a dozen regulations, ignored a direct order, and put yourself in a position where you could have been killed. You know that too." She met his eyes again. "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I'm not going to court-martial you, but this is going into your record, and you're going to have some very uncomfortable conversations with very senior people when you get back stateside." She allowed herself a small smile. "Wouldn't be the first time, sir." Harding almost laughed. Almost. He stood, picking up the file. "Get some rest. There's a transport heading back to Kuwait tomorrow morning. You'll be on it." Dismissed. She stood, snapped a salute. He returned it, then watched as she walked out of the room. When the door closed, he sat back down, opened the file again, and read through her commendations one more time. After a long moment, he picked up his phone and dialed a number in Tampa. The flight back to Kuwait was quiet. Asha sat in the back of a C-130, strapped into a red canvas seat, surrounded by cargo pallets and a handful of Marines who were too tired to care who she was. She stared out the small window at the desert passing below, her mind replaying the mission. The descent. The gun runs. The way the A-10 had shuddered under fire but kept flying. She thought about the SEALs, wondered if they had made it out clean, wondered if they even knew her name. Probably not. Was fine, she hadn't done it for recognition. The C-130 landed at Ali Al Salem just after noon, the ramp dropping with a hydraulic whine. She grabbed her gear and walked across the tarmac toward the transient quarters. Halfway there, a young airman jogged up to her, slightly out of breath. "Ma'am, you're Captain Nayar." She stopped. "That's right." The airman handed her a slip of paper. "You've got a call holding in the command post. They said it's important." She glanced at the paper, then nodded. "Thanks." The command post was a squat building near the flight line, packed with radios and monitors. A senior NCO pointed her toward a secure phone in a side office. She picked up the receiver. "Captain Nayar." The voice on the other end was gravelly, worn. "Captain, this is Command Master Chief Riggs, SEAL Team 7. I'm calling on behalf of Reaper 1 Actual." She straightened slightly. "Yes, Master Chief." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "He wanted me to pass along a message. He said, and I quote, 'Tell Gypsy she flies like she's got a personal grudge against gravity and we owe her 12 lives. Asha felt something tighten in her chest. She swallowed. "Tell him I'm glad they made it out." Riggs's voice softened. We know what you did and we know what it cost you. If you ever need anything at all, you call this number. We take care of our own." The line went dead before she could respond. She stood there for a moment, holding the receiver, then slowly hung up. Outside, the sun was high and brutal, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer. She walked back to her quarters, dropped her gear, and lay down on the narrow cot. Sleep didn't come easily. It never did after a mission. Instead, she stared at the ceiling, thinking about the kids in Syria, about the seals in the riverbed, about all the choices that had led her here. Eventually, exhaustion won. She slept dreamlessly, the kind of sleep that came from knowing you had done the right thing, even if no one else agreed. 3 days later, Asha was back in the United States, standing in an office at Joint Base Andrews. The room was sterile, impersonal, with a conference table and a flag in the corner. Across from her sat a brigadier general she didn't recognize and a colonel from JAG. The general's nameplate read Hayes. He didn't look pleased. "Captain Nayar, do you understand why you're here?" She stood at attention. "Yes, sir. To discuss my actions during the close air support mission on October 4th. Hayes leaned back in his chair. "You ignored a direct order from a general officer. You endangered your aircraft and yourself, and you conducted a strike without proper clearance." She didn't respond. Hayes continued. "However, the SEAL team you supported has submitted a formal commendation. They credit you with saving their lives. The after-action review confirms that your fires were accurate and effective, and your aircraft, despite the damage, was recovered without loss." Oz tapping a pen against the table. "So now I have a problem. On one hand, you violated protocol. On the other hand, you did exactly what we train pilots to do, make the hard call when it matters." The JAG colonel spoke up. "Captain, we've reviewed your record. This isn't your first time pushing boundaries. Why should we believe this won't happen again?" Asha met his gaze. "Because I don't push boundaries for the sake of it, sir. I do it when lives are on the line and the calculus is clear. I'd do it again if I had to." Hayes's expression didn't change. "That's what concerns me." He opened a folder, scanned a page, then looked up. "I'm issuing you a letter of reprimand. It goes in your permanent record. You'll also undergo a formal review with your guard unit, but I'm not recommending court-martial and I'm not grounding you." Asha felt a flicker of surprise but kept her face neutral. "Understood, sir." Hayes stood. "Dismissed, Captain and Captain." She paused at the door. "Yes, sir." He held her gaze. "The next time you decide to ignore an order, make damn sure you're right." She nodded. "Always do, sir." She walked out, the letter of reprimand tucked under her arm. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, the sky a pale blue. She took a deep breath and headed toward her car. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Gypsy, this is Reaper One. Beer's on me when you're back in town. You've got family now." She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. "Roger that." She climbed into her car and drove home, the letter of reprimand sitting on the passenger seat. It didn't matter. None of it did. She had done her job. The rest was just paperwork. The guard unit was based out of Boise, Idaho, a place where the sky stretched forever and the mountains loomed like silent sentinels. Asha reported in 2 weeks later, expecting the cold shoulder, the sideways looks, the whispers that always followed someone who had made waves. Instead, the squadron commander, a lieutenant colonel named Diaz, greeted her in his office with a firm handshake and a slight smile. "Nayar, heard you've been busy." She stood at ease. "Yes, sir." Diaz gestured to a chair. She sat. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Let me tell you something. This unit has been flying hogs for 30 years. We've lost people, we've saved people, and every single pilot in this squadron knows what it means to make the hard call." He paused, studying her. "You've got a letter of reprimand, that's going to follow you, but you've also got something a lot of pilots never earn, respect." She didn't know how to respond to that. Diaz continued. "The SEALs reached out to me personally. They want you to know you're welcome on any operation they run. That's not something they say lightly." He pushed off the desk, walked to the window. "You're staying on the flight schedule, no restrictions, but I need to know you're going to keep your head in the game and not let this define you." Asha nodded. "It won't, sir. I'm here to fly and to do the job." Diaz turned back to her. "Good, because we need pilots like you." Dismissed. She stood, saluted, and walked out. In the hallway, a few of the other pilots were gathered near the scheduling board. They looked up as she passed. One of them, a captain named Torres, gave her a nod. "Gypsy, Good to have you back. She paused, surprised. Thanks. Another pilot, a younger lieutenant, grinned. Heard you made a general pretty mad. Asha allowed herself a small smile. Something like that. Tors laughed. Hell, half the people in this unit have pissed off a general at some point. You're in good company. They went back to their conversation and Asha continued down the hall. For the first time in weeks, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Over the following months, she settled back into the rhythm of the guard, training flights, readiness drills, the occasional deployment to support exercises overseas. She kept her head down, flew well, and avoided drawing attention. But word had spread. The story of the A-10 pilot who had ignored a general and saved a SEAL team became legend, passed along in ready rooms and over beers. She didn't talk about it. Didn't need to. The people who mattered already knew. 6 months after the incident, Asha was back overseas, this time in the Horn of Africa. A small detachment, 4 A-10s and a handful of pilots, rotating through Camp Lemonnier to provide close air support for counterterrorism operations. The missions were routine, mostly overwatch, the kind of flying that required patience more than aggression. She didn't mind. Routine was fine. Routine meant everyone came home. One afternoon, she was in the briefing room reviewing the next day's flight plan when her phone buzzed. A message from a number she recognized now. Reaper 1. Gypsy, we're in your neighborhood. Any chance you're free for that beer? She smiled, typed a reply. Where? The response came quickly. DFAC 1800. She showed up at 6, still in her flight suit, and found Reaper 1 actual sitting at a corner table with 2 other SEALs. He stood when he saw her, extending a hand. Captain Nayar. Good to finally meet you in person. She shook his hand. Up close, he was shorter than she expected, compact and broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. His eyes were sharp, the kind that didn't miss anything. Just a Shah or Gypsy, whatever works. He gestured to the table. This is Chief Baxter and Petty Officer Collins. They were in the riverbed with me. Baxter was tall and lean, with a quiet intensity. Collins was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a scar running along his jawline. They both nodded. Asha sat down and Reaper 1 slid a bottle of water across the table. Sorry, no beer here, but the sentiment's the same. She took the water, opened it. Appreciate it. Reaper 1 leaned back, studying her. We wanted to thank you in person. What you did, that wasn't just good flying. That was trusting your gut and putting everything on the line for people you didn't know. Asha shook her head. It was the job. Baxter spoke up, his voice low and steady. No, it was more than that. A lot of pilots would have stayed high, stayed safe, and let us figure it out. You didn't. She didn't know what to say to that. Collins grinned. Plus, you made a general look like an idiot. That's worth something. Reaper 1 shot him a look, but there was a hint of a smile. What Collins means is, we've been doing this long enough to know when someone's got our back. You do, and that matters. They talked for a while, trading stories, the kind of easy conversation that came from shared experience. When the sun set and the call to evening prayer echoed across the base, Reaper 1 stood. We're wheels up in the morning, but if you ever need anything, you reach out. We're serious about that. Asha stood as well. I will. Fly safe. He nodded, then headed out with Baxter and Collins. Asha stayed for a moment, finishing her water, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. The deployment ended without incident, and Asha rotated back to Boise in late spring. The mountains were green, the air cool and clean. She fell back into the routine of the guard, flying a few times a week, instructing younger pilots, staying current. But something had shifted. The story of Gypsy 7-1 had taken on a life of its own. She started getting invitations to speak at PME courses, at squadron gatherings, at events where people wanted to hear about decision-making under pressure. She turned most of them down, but when a request came from the weapons school at Nellie's, she accepted. The weapons school was the pinnacle of Air Force tactical training, the place where the best pilots came to get better. Asha stood in front of a room full of students, all of them younger, sharper, hungrier than she had been at their age. She told them the story, not as a hero's tale, but as a case study in risk, judgment, and consequence. She talked about the SEALs, the descent, the damage her aircraft had taken. And she talked about the letter of reprimand, the near court-martial, the cost of making the hard call. When she finished, the room was silent. Then a captain in the front row raised his hand. "Ma'am, if you had to do it again, would you change anything?" She thought about that. "No, I'd do it exactly the same, because the mission isn't about following orders. It's about bringing people home." Another student spoke up. "But what if you'd been wrong? What if the SEALs had been hit by your fire?" Asha met his eyes. "Then I'd have to live with that, but I wasn't wrong, and that's the difference. I knew the terrain, I knew my aircraft, I knew what I could do. Confidence without competence is arrogance. Competence without confidence is hesitation. You need both." The class ended with applause, something she hadn't expected. Afterwards, several students came up to ask questions, to shake her hand, to tell her they wanted to fly like she did. She listened, offered advice, and then quietly slipped out. On the drive back to Boise, she thought about the future. She was 43 now, older than most pilots still flying fighters. The guard would keep her until 50 if she wanted, but after that the sky would belong to someone else. She was okay with that. The story would outlive her anyway. A year later, Asha was back in the Middle East, this time in Jordan, supporting a joint exercise with coalition forces. The days were long and hot, the flying technical and demanding. She was leading a four-ship, running close air support scenarios with forward air controllers on the ground. It was the kind of training that sharpened skills and saved lives when the real thing came. On the third day of the exercise, she was holding overhead a simulated objective when the JTAC on the ground called in a request. "Gypsy 7-1, Dagger 2-1, we have troops in contact. Scenario is now live fire. Request immediate support." She toggled the radio. "Dagger Gypsy, say position and threat." The JTAC rattled off coordinates, and Asha pulled them up on her display. The geometry was tight, friendlies within 500 meters of the target area. She ran through the mental checklist, calculated angles and altitudes, then rolled in. The gun run was textbook, precise, controlled. The 30 rounds impacted exactly where they were supposed to, and the JTAC came back with enthusiasm. "Gypsy Dagger, Shaq, good hits, good effects. You just made my day." She climbed back to altitude, feeling the familiar satisfaction of a job done well. But as she leveled off, she caught sight of something on the horizon. Another A-10 flying low and fast, trailing smoke. Her wingman's voice crackled over the radio. "Lead 2, I've got a hydraulic failure, need to RTB." Asha's mind shifted instantly. "2 lead, copy, what's your status?" Her wingman, a captain named Ellis, sounded calm but tight. "Single hydraulic system, flight controls are mushy. I can make it back, but it's not going to be pretty." Asha glanced at her fuel, enough to escort Ellis back to base. "2 lead, I've got you, follow me." She took the lead, keeping Ellis in sight, monitoring his aircraft for signs of further degradation. They flew in silence, the desert passing below, and she thought about the A-10 she had brought back to Al-Assad a year ago. The toughness of the jet, the way it absorbed punishment and kept flying. Ellis made it back without incident, landing hard but safe. Afterward, in the debrief, he looked at her with something like awe. "Thanks for sticking with me, ma'am. I wasn't sure I was going to make it." She shook her head. "You did fine. That's what the jet's built for, taking hits and bringing you home." He nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. Young pilots always doubted, at least until they learned to trust themselves. She made a note to fly with him again to help him build that trust. It was part of the job, too. The exercise wrapped up a week later, and Asha returned to Boise. Summer was in full swing, the days long and bright. She took leave, spent time hiking in the sawtooths, trying to clear her head. But the mountains couldn't quiet the restlessness she felt.